Hello and welcome back to the game room. You know what I love? Video games. You know what I love talking about? Games. And it seems like a lot of people who cover games these days seem to hate them. Or at least the people who play them. Well, that's not me, and that's not the 1,588 of you beautiful people checking this video out today. Last week's video was huge. Thank you all so much. Thank you to all the new subscribers. Welcome to the channel. The rebrand worked. Hey, I'm glad your feeds are finally seeing me. And for this episode, there's been a lot of controversy about whether the new release of Final Fantasy XVI is actually a Final Fantasy game. And I thought, hey, I just played it. I just beat it. Why don't we go ahead and throw my thoughts out there? So for this video, it's not going to be a full-on review. It's more going to be an amalgamation of me answering that question, which if you just want to cut to the chase, yes, it's obviously a Final Fantasy game. We'll get into it, but if you just want to know yes or no, yes. But if you want to stick around for the video, hear my thoughts, impressions, and then there'll be some spoilers, probably some major spoilers, so when we get to that part, I will let you know, and then you can check out at that point. There's a lot of games out there, some of which you've never even heard of. That's where I come in. My name's Luke. I've been playing games since the age of 2, and I have no life.
This is my game room.
Alright, so Final Fantasy XVI came out. I have beaten it. It looks like it took about 35 hours for me to do it. Now, just to preface this, I am an old school turn-based Final Fantasy fan. The first game I ever played in the series is Final Fantasy VII on the PS1, which was then followed up by Final Fantasy Tactics. Now, Tactics, for a lot of you, know it's one of my favorite games of all time. If not my favorite game of all time. It kind of dukes it out with Link to the Past these days. After that, I played Final Fantasy VIII, which I loved. I really liked how much more realistic the sprites looked. And then I played Final Fantasy IX, which, against a lot of the greater YouTube commentary, I actually didn't enjoy it. I stopped playing it. I think part of it was I just felt the game was looking too immature. You had too many characters that looked like furries, and I just didn't get into it. I got really far in the game, but I didn't actually beat it, or at least I think I beat it with a Game Shark. And then after that, I didn't get a PS2 until late in the PS2 life cycle, and one of the earlier games was Final Fantasy X. I never played Final Fantasy X. And this, for you guys to know, was the last turn-based game they made in the franchise. And that came out, what, 2001? So we've actually had more games come out in the non-turn-based Final Fantasy era than in the turn-based Final Fantasy era, if you consider that. I mean, it came out in 87 in Japan, but in the West, I think it was 89. So you have about 13 years turn-based, and we're going on, what, 20 years of non-turn-based? Because 11 was an MMO. And then Final Fantasy 12 came out, and we're not counting X2, but yeah, that was a thing, which also broke precedent, because before that, Final Fantasy never had sequels to existing games. You had Final Fantasy 12, which I gave up on, Final Fantasy 13, which I gave up on. They had like 3 versions of Final Fantasy 13. Then there was Final Fantasy 14, the MMO, Realm Reborn, 15, which I didn't even realize I had on the Xbox One. It's sealed, too. I never even opened the damn thing. Thought I had it on the PS4. And then most recently, before 16, was Final Fantasy VII Remake, which I did get through, but the fact that it was not turn-based was something that really irked me. And also early for the channel, I played Final Fantasy III, which is one of the legendary turn-based games. Now, where does 16 rank in all this? Well, it has a lot going for it. As an old-school Final Fantasy fan, they really hit home with a lot of what I loved playing when I was a kid, which was the summons. So the whole point of the game is the icons. Essentially, there's 8 people in the world of this world that can have the summon of Leviathan, or Odin, or Bahamut, or Shiva, Titan, and then you draw on this ether power. It allows you to prime, where you get special abilities, and then you can turn into these giant monster colossuses that are the summons and fight them. And then you find out that you are the secret 9th icon named Ifrit, and it's how you deal with the ramifications of getting that power, what it leads to, and that right there, the fact that there's so much lore, and it feels like a mature Final Fantasy for the first time in years. You're actually playing as a character that doesn't look like a 17-year-old girl, which was a lot of the issues I had. A lot of the protagonists in the Final Fantasies are just jackasses, which when I was 10 or 12, I didn't mind as much. Cloud was really just distant, but Squall is just a jackass. I didn't care much for, I think, Zidane with 9, and then 10 with Titus, and all the other ones just kind of fell by the wayside. Like, a lot of the better characters tended to be the side characters that weren't actually the main character. The main character almost became an avatar just to prolong the story. But not in this game. In 16, they really put Clive, not Clyde, I keep confusing that, front and center in his story, and it's a wonderful story. There's time skips, there's going back and forth. I think it has the best iteration of the Sid character. It has the best iteration of summons I've ever seen. You have these giant Godzilla-like fights. So as far as it being Final Fantasy-like, yes, the combat is completely different, but let's face it, they left us turn-based combat fans behind a long time ago, and in my opinion, Final Fantasy XVI is both the best thing to happen to Final Fantasy in years, but also the worst thing to happen if you're a fan of the turn-based combat, because they developed this new over-the-top action style from the guys from Devil May Cry that I think reminds me a little bit more of a God of War hack and slash, but a little bit more Sekiro planning and with cooldowns and determination put into it, and together it all works incredibly well. Now, if you don't like action games, this system may not be for you. They put in a lot of accessibility options, but at the end of the day, this is one of the easiest games I've played in a long time. It's very hard because they have it paced so well as far as what your power is going to be throughout the game, as long as you're buying the weapons, buying the upgrades. Now, there's a crafting system, there's side quests. It's not the strongest in the series. I actually like it, though, because I'm not a huge fan of these intricate tables and upgrade tables and things in like the consumables. Generally, once the new upgrade is available, you have enough money to buy it, or you have enough consumables to make it, you go on with your day. Now, it's going to be like a 5 damage increment, but that's kind of what I enjoyed of the older games anyways, is going to a town, buying a new weapon when it's time to buy the new weapon, and then onward and offward from there. The side quests are not the strongest. There are some wonderful side quests, but the main issue I have with the game is the pacing. The first 10 hours or so is incredible. You have the prologue, and then from the prologue, you have all this new stuff come on where Clive is getting his new outfit, dealing with the fact that he's a bearer now. Bearers in this world are people who can use magic without the use of crystals. So there's actually a real an enslavement system where people are born either with the innate ability to use magic, they're born as dominants who can call on one of the icons, or they're regular people who can use magic by harnessing a crystal. So if I have a crystal that does water magic, I can do it through that crystal, but if I'm what's called a bearer, I can infuse water magic by drawing from the aether, which is this magic in the air, and then making it that way. And for some reason in this world, the people who can control magic innately have become enslaved, which takes a little bit of suspension of disbelief, because if you can conjure fire and someone's coming to you and saying, hey, I'm going to control you, can't you just conjure fire and burn them all to the ground? Yes, if they have the access to a crystal, they could fight you back, but still, suspension of disbelief. I mean, there's a book series called The Wheel of Time where they actually have the ability to control people who control magic by putting these collars on them. And I almost would think that kind of thing would have needed to be done, because if you have, even if it's just a minuscule population, and yes, the regular people can harness crystals by using it, you think with having the innate ability, they would not have allowed themselves to get subjugated, and with having dominance as an ability too. But anyways, it's a game. I digress. We're not looking too much into it, but that's how good the game is. If a game is getting you to look into it that introspectively, then you know it's done something right. It's a very mature story, very well-rounded, well-written characters, but they do have points where there's 5 mother crystals that you visit in the game. So that's kind of the source of power in this world, is the mother crystals draw source, but there's a infection that's hit the land that all the magic is starting to wane in the world. So you have this very Game of Thrones-like political intrigue between the warring nations to control the different mother crystals, and then you are kind of caught up in the middle of it along with Sid and your childhood friend Jill, who you reconnect with, and other things like that. Your dog Torgal, which the dog is a good boy, you can even pet him. But it's just the Game of Thrones-ness. It almost feels like actual Game of Thrones, because at a certain point in the story, all that stuff just goes by the wayside. They even have some funny call-outs to Game of Thrones Season 8, but almost some shade they throw at it, which if you know, you know. It has to do with a certain incident in the main capital. But you get to these sections where you visit the mother crystals. Now, I won't say why, but you get to each one. So there's 5 of them. And because of that, they're unfortunately, after you visit a mother crystal, sometimes they will essentially reset the baseline. So that's where you'll have the time skips, or that's when you'll have these almost waste of time side quests to reinforce more of the world, which, yes, makes sense at the beginning of the game, because in the first 10 hours you meet the different characters. You meet Martha, you meet Luquan, or the other various leaders of the town at Quinton. But then, as you're going through the game, having to then go back and revisit them almost slows the pace. And there's you meet Sid's daughter Mid, which really slows the pace when she wants you to build a mithril engine, which it turns out to actually matter down the line. But when you spend, let's say, 3 quests in a row building this engine, only to be told, okay, we built 1, we have to build 3 more, but I can take it from here, and then you don't hear about it again for another 5 hours after you just had an incredible set piece moment, it really slows down the action. And that's one of the things that, unfortunately, because it has set up this thing where you're visiting the 5 crystals, is you set up an expectation of how the game is playing out. It's like, okay, there's this many icons, there's this many crystals, and I know I'm going to visit them each one by one, and this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. So then in order to stretch out the game, they add these quests so that you're not just rushing to the end, or they don't have to swerve into something else. And that can really slow down the plot. The way I liken it to is if it's almost like a mid-season break for something like The Walking Dead, where you have a big set-piece moment, and then when you come back from the mid-season break, there's 1 or 2 episodes of filler before you get back on board with the main plot. And so that can be very annoying. And I beat this game in about 8 days, so there is pacing to it. Generally in a night, I would do maybe 4 to 5 hours. I would get from one point, get to a mother crystal, and then have a nice stopping point. So it wouldn't affect me as much, but if you're doing a 10-15 hour playthrough, or just a 10-15 hour session, or if you only had a couple hours, then you would get bogged down, because every time you're like, oh god, I ran into a new city. And then once you get into the new city, what will happen is periodically the game will then allow you to access all these new side quests, or all these new upgrades, or there'll be new hunts added to your board. And if you want to go through, like I did, I wanted to go through and complete all the side quests, because some of them would actually increase your potion inventory, or give you access to a mount, which I found out if it has a plus sign, those are the ones that will do that. But I like to clear those off the board, and periodically I'd get to a point where I would then see 6 new side quests open up, and I wasn't necessarily as enjoying it as much as like, oh god. But why this game is the best thing to happen to Final Fantasy, in my opinion, is that they finally, that for years they've been trying to dance with this, are we an action RPG, are we an MMO, are we trying to be honest or true to our old ATB roots with the turn-based and the gambit system. And then for this one they said, nope, throw it out the door. We're not doing a party system, so we're not going to have you bouncing around. You're going to only be one guy. And you will have party members join with you, so you do feel like you do have a party. Like, I can easily see how this game would have translated to a traditional turn-based Final Fantasy, where you have, oh, there's the uncle character, there's the dog, there's the friend. But you don't have to bog down certain classes with needing a healer spec, for instance, which is nice. Is you don't have someone who's just there for heals. Everyone is worthwhile that joins you, and really, Clive is the star attraction of this, and the combat is very, very fun. There is a dodge system which allows you to do a kind of a riposte where you attack. There's a parry system that's very confusing. The limit break allows you to go into this ultimate mode, which it builds up fast. So that's the thing, is it's very fast-paced combat. You have different icons. So each one of the icons, like Phoenix and Ifrit, Garuda, and the other icons you will eventually get, you'll be able to use different abilities for them, and then you can assign those abilities by upgrading different things with ability points you get, which this game has also given you the ability to refund your points at any point. So if you want to screw around with any spec you want, you can. Now, I'm glad they did that. I am. But I found one of the things is that I found a skill set I liked, and then when I got a new icon ability to use, I just wouldn't use it, because I got really used to using Titan, Garuda, and then a mix of Ifrit, Phoenix. And when I got the other icons, I would try it, and then I would immediately go back to what I was working with, because Garuda gives you the ability to throw a hook shot or a death coil, death grip, where you grab it at a certain halfway point, and then you can put them down, and then has this other big whirlwind, and then Titan has the ability for you can block and then counter, and then Ifrit and Phoenix, I just enjoyed their playstyle more than the other icons. And the biggest issue I had with the icons in general is that the game sets up there's 8 icons, so you expect to see 8, and then the mystery is that you were the mysterious 9th icon. where does this come into play? So you meet Odin, you meet Bahamut, you meet Garuda, you meet Titan, you meet Shiva, you meet the Phoenix, and you meet Rama. But you do not meet the 8th icon. The 8th icon of water is Leviathan. And the whole game, I'm waiting, who's Leviathan? Who's Leviathan? Because you get these big, giant scale fights with these almost Godzilla-like monsters. So I was just waiting like, oh man, we're going to get this giant sea serpent. This is going to be sweet. They haven't even mentioned her or him for the whole game. It's going to pop up. We're on a boat. Oh, here comes Leviathan. There's a giant waterfall. Oh man, Leviathan's coming. Not at all. Never mentioned. They mentioned Leviathan once as Leviathan the Lost. So I don't know if this is DLC. They have said there is no DLC coming, but there you go. And here's the major spoilers. So there you go. So as far as what I'm saying, as an old school Final Fantasy fan, I do think this is a very good Final Fantasy game. It's definitely, I don't know, top 5 for me. Now it is not turn-based at all, but because of the combat, what they've done, it is so much fun that I forgive it for it. And that I'm happy to play it, and I would be happy to play more games like this because they've done such a good job of world building, of crafting a story, of giving us this intrigue and respecting the lore and respecting the source material by having these big monsters now. Before you just used them as summons, now you can actually fight as them and fight against them. And I would like to see them do more with this. Now, where it's bad is that because it's been so successful, I don't ever see them going back to anything turn-based like with the main series ever again. Which is a shame because I still enjoy that. I still think turn-based games will sell in today's age. But I think for Square Enix, they've really made a decision that, Dragon Quest is their turn-based series, Final Fantasy is their flagship series as far as selling copies. And with the success of Final Fantasy XIV, the MMO, the writing team, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to try this, is a lot of people talk about Final Fantasy XIV having terrific writing and terrific characters, and I gotta say, I was very attached to the characters in this game. I think some of the storylines, unfortunately, were put into ways that I wasn't really happy with, because like I said, they set it up as this Game of Thrones intrigue, but then, almost like Game of Thrones itself, eventually they start chopping it down and cutting it down, and going into these wings for instance, all right, so now we're in spoilers. So there you go. We'll get the spoilers here. So for instance, Titan is obsessed with Garuda's character, and so you find out later that Odin takes Garuda's body and sends it to Titan, which sends him off into the rails, and then he thinks that Sid had did this, which when in reality it was Clive who killed him, and then that just kind of colors the whole thing to where you just know, like, okay, after we did this, we're going to go take down Titan. Instead of it being like there's all these players and you'll come into contact with them and then, move on to the next, they really make it where it's like, okay, Garuda's the big bad, Garuda's defeated. Titan's the big bad, Titan's defeated. Bahamut's the big bad, Bahamut's defeated. Odin's the big bad, Odin's defeated. And specifically the section between Bahamut and Odin where you're going to the fifth mother crystal really slows down because they try and build Odin up as this badass, but it just never really feels that badass because he's also the subsidiary of the actual bad guy, which turns out is Ultima, which another thing that's a great showcase to the fans of the series, Ultima obviously being another name we've known of, and just it makes sense, and they bring in a lot of the lore and the God creating world, and then creates man, and then man overcoming the gods, which happens a lot in the older games. Like, it felt, as I was listening to the dialogue, I felt like I was listening to stuff like Xenogears again, and so it felt like old Square. So I liked that. I liked that a lot. And I really enjoyed the game. And the one thing that was a little weird is the fact that, okay, so you have Joshua, who is the Phoenix, you have Clive, who is Ifrit. Okay, I can understand that, they're brothers. But then Jill Warwick is Shiva, and they just all happen to grow up together and be the best of friends until all that incident happens. Okay, all right, I'll suspend disbelief a little bit there. But as far as the game goes, highly recommend it. If you want to check it out, I will say give it a playthrough, and it is now most likely my favorite game on the PS5, one of my favorite Final Fantasies, and something that I look forward to seeing more of, although that Leviathan thing really does piss me off. But yeah, that's my thoughts on Final Fantasy 16. As someone who would say, is it a Final Fantasy game? Yes, through and through it is a Final Fantasy game, even though it does not have the combat that I grew up loving. But let's face it, that combat system was thrown out decades ago, and it's not like something like Final Fantasy VII Remake where I begrudgingly played it and then was very disappointed the longer I get from it. With this game, I was hook, line, and sinker in the beginning and really, really enjoyed my time playing it. So yes, there you go. As a reminder, guys, I put out a new video every Tuesday. Thank you to all the new subs, all the new fans of the channel. I have a Patreon. Hit that like button, subscribe, comment. Tell me what an idiot I am. If you've made it this far in the video, let me know if you've played the game, what your favorite icon was, who you'd like to see in it. Because I really was thinking, okay, great, Ifrit's a mystery icon. Does that mean we're going to get Siren? We're going to get Carbuncle, Tonberry, things of that nature. And seeing the classic Final Fantasy characters in full HD, because like I said, I skipped 15 and the other games, so actually seeing them represented like the Marlboro early in the prologue was really cool, and it hit that nostalgia, member berryness just enough. And then also, I love Godzilla, so seeing those big Godzilla-like fights. And I'm not talking about the controversy. Like, there's a lot of articles out there just spewing BS about the game, so whatever. I don't even think most of those people beat the game, because there is the ending of the game, if you see all the side quests, you will interpret it differently than if you don't. So I'll just leave it at that. Alright guys, it's been so nice getting a hold of you. Take care.